candidates to an abandoned factory in Wilmington, Ohio, where 9,000 workers were laid off when German shipping firm DHL ended their U.S. operations in 2009. Mitt Romney used the setting to drive home his message that it's time for new leadership.
It just underscores how many people in this country are hurting, in part because of the policies of Barack Obama.
Romney, Rick Santorum, and Newt Gingrich all attacked the president's policies, but didn't go after each other directly. The invite as he heads to campaign in Alaska, one of 10 states holding contests on Super Tuesday. Perhaps the most sought-after prize on Tuesday will be Ohio. Recent polls show Rick Santorum's lead over Mitt Romney tightening there in recent days. Arnie Seipel, NPR News, Washington.
This is NPR News. President Obama begins a week of Middle East diplomacy today. He's to deliver a speech in Washington to AIPAC, Israel's foremost lobby group in the U.S. And then tomorrow he's meeting at the White House with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Iran's disputed nuclear program is likely to be high on the agenda, so is the situation in Syria. Israel's foreign minister said today the global community's inability to stop the violence in Syria raises questions about how much Israel should count on foreign pledges of support. Governments around the world will begin a warning today. They'll be told at church that they must not conduct posthumous baptisms for deceased celebrities, prominent Jews, victims of the Holocaust. There's specific criticism of the practices. Here's Howard Jones.
Morning, President Johnson has instructed bishops in every Union congregation on the Mennonite Church Sunday addressing one of the faith's most controversial practices. Without exception, the letter says church leaders must not conduct posthumous baptisms for celebrities, Holocaust victims, and anyone else who is not an ancestor. The faith has been embarrassed by recent revelations that Holocaust victim Anne Frank, terrorism victim Danny Kerr, and other prominent Jews were listed on Mormon baptism records. Holocaust survivor Elie Wiesel asked Mormon and presidential candidate Mitt Romney to condemn the practice. The letter warns violators will lose access to the church genealogical system and could face stiffer sanctions. Howard Jones, NPR News.
Russians are voting today in an election widely expected to return Prime Minister Vladimir Putin to the presidency. The voting is being monitored by red cameras and volunteer civilian observers. I'm Giles Snyder, and this is NPR News from Washington.
Support for NPR comes from the William T. Grant Foundation, supporting research to improve the lives of young people. Online at wtgrantfoundation.org. Growth management, healthcare, tax policy. Right now, politicians are debating economic policies that will affect you.
They are making decisions right now that will affect all of our pocketbooks, both specifically to the individual and generally to our community.
Economist Hank Fishkind breaks down the complex issues Tuesdays at 7:35, Morning Edition.
S. James Gates is a physicist, a theorist on the exotically named frontiers of superstrings and supersymmetry. These are fields where science is trying to reconcile its own most baffling contradictions. And whether you can fully comprehend string theory or not, its basic assumptions stretch our imagination about the nature of the universe we inhabit. James Gates brings this home with ideas and questions we can all chew on and be enriched by. He lets us into the playful, creative, even spiritual act of naming in science. He's working to evolve the cosmic language of mathematics, much as poetry evolved alongside prose to tell the whole story of what we're made of and where we came from. And he sees codes embedded in reality, something like the codes embedded in computer programs.
I remember watching the movies The Matrix, and so the thought occurred to me, suppose there were physicists in this movie. How would they figure out that they lived in the Matrix? Well, one way they might do that is to look for evidence of codes in the laws of their physics. But you see, that's what had happened to me already.
Uncovering the codes for reality. I'm Krista Tippett. This is On Being from APM, American Public Media. Sylvester Professor James Gates Jr. is a professor and director of the Center for String and Particle Theory at the University of Maryland. I interviewed him once before, years ago, for a program on Einstein's ethics. We talked then about the inspiration he drew from Einstein's little-remembered passion for racial equality. James Gates spent part of his own childhood attending segregated schools, but he went on to become the first African American to hold an endowed chair in physics at a major U.S. research university. And his work on supersymmetry, a feature of the universe that might help illustrate string theory, is part of the greatest controversy in physics since Einstein. How to explain the fact that the universe seems to follow different rules at its highest levels and its smallest levels. String theorists suggest that deeper than atoms, deeper than electrons, behind quarks, filaments or strings of vibrating energies animate all the richness and diversity of the cosmos. James Gates' own early interest in science was sparked by books about rocket ships by a writer named Willy Ley and a movie called Space Waves. Isn't it interesting that space is the word we use? It doesn't even begin to convey what you know about what we call space. No.
I like to tell people that from reading the books by Willy Ley, I had my own personal Big Bang between my ears, because around age 8 or so, I had an idea about how large the universe must be. And it didn't come from any great deep insight. The point was that as an 8-year-old child, I saw these tiny dots of light in the sky. And when I realized that they were places, the question was, well, gee, how far could they be if they were that small? And so I just had a sense of the enormity of the size of the universe, not by any scientific or mathematical scale, but just sort of in a personal relationship sort of way. That's when I kind of knew where I was in the universe. It's a very strange thing for an 8-year-old kid to come upon, but that's what happened to me.
And you also, I understand, were reading science fiction. You had a big science life and a big fantasy life. And in fact, both of those things worked well with going into physics.
Absolutely. That drive to learn to read actually caused an intersection with another very famous name of science fiction, namely Isaac Asimov.
Oh, right.
Isaac Asimov had another pseudonym called Paul French, and he wrote a series of children's books of adventures on Mars.
I didn't know that.
Yes, and the character's name was Lucky Star with 2 R's. And my mother died from cancer in 1963. And one of the ways that I avoided having to deal with that horribly painful situation was to escape into the world of science fiction and fantasy. And so that was a very powerful force impelling me to exercise my imagination. Then on top of that, we have kind of what I call a math bug in our family. My grandfather could neither read nor write, but he could do simple arithmetic. And my dad never finished high school, but he was clearly interested in mathematics. I remember watching him studying trigonometry and even some calculus as he was a soldier, and particularly when he was working with artillery of the U.S. Army.
So I wonder, is it right that you wrote the first ever doctoral dissertation at MIT? This may be a stretch to go here, but when you were a young physicist, physics had made incredible foundational breakthroughs in the early part of the 20th century. And then those breakthroughs enabled other breakthroughs, which led to, you could say it, an incredible lack of symmetry in terms of the understanding of the universe, right? That they were
That's
fundamentally... Is it?
Krista, are you sure you're not a scientist?
I'm trying. I'm doing my best. So